The Atlanta Braves don't have a ton of weaknesses on the roster heading into the season, but left field certainly seems to be one of them. We'll discuss that and some other potential weaknesses for the Atlanta Braves heading into the 2023 season on this episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jacob Mastriani. You can follow me on Twitter at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you check out my website, shortstopball.com, where you can see some of my written material on the Braves and some of my other work as well. Make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback that you have for the podcast. If you're new, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you're watching this video there, please do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button to help support the show. Thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. We post episodes daily, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and are free and available on all platforms. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the biggest weaknesses for the Atlanta Braves going into the 2023 season. I'll get some of your takes as well, what you think will be some of the biggest weaknesses for the Braves. I'll discuss left field, DH, depth, and defensive on the left side of the infield as well. Well, let's jump into it with our first subject here, and that is going to be the left field situation. I asked this on Twitter, and this was by far the one that got the most responses when I asked what your biggest weaknesses are for the Braves heading into the season. And left field is, again, I think easily the biggest area of weakness for the Atlanta Braves. Now, Braves don't have a ton of weaknesses overall, and on tomorrow's podcast, which I'll be recording later today, as the internet was out yesterday, so I didn't get to record this one, but we're going to talk about the biggest strengths for the team heading into the season. There are a lot more strengths than weaknesses, which is certainly great, but I think left field is one of those potential weaknesses, and it wasn't fully addressed in the offseason. Going into the offseason, we knew the Braves needed to upgrade at shortstop and left field. Looks like they're going to fill the shortstop position with Vaughn Grissom, but left field wasn't necessarily addressed in terms of they didn't find somebody who can be an everyday fit at the position that you can feel confident and lock in there for 150, 160 games a year. They didn't get Andrew Benintendi, which is what one of my hopes on my wish list. They didn't even get a Michael Conforto. They got a bunch of potential players. Throwing some darts at the board and hoping that something hits with Sam Hilliard, with Eli White, with Jordan Luplow, with Kevin Pillar. They just signed a bunch of outfielders, potential guys with maybe some upside a little bit with Hilliard and White specifically, but just brought in some guys who they feel like maybe with a couple of changes that they can become everyday guys, or if not, perhaps there's a platoon situation there. Before we get into the rest of that, though, I wanted to go back to last year and games by player in left field. Marcell Ozuna started 52 games in left field last year for the Braves, the most starts for any Braves left fielder. Rosario had 46, Duvall 26, Robbie Grossman 19, Guillermo Heredia 6, Travis Demeritte 6, Orlando Arcia 6. That was an experience. And they even tried William Contreras out there for a game. So again, was spread out amongst a lot of people. Part of that is because Michael Harris wasn't up to start the year, so Duvall was in center. If he's in left, then I think that position is a lot more steady. And Acuna was delayed to start the season and then spent a lot of time at the DH position, so you had to fill right field as well. So that played a lot into some of the issues that the Braves had in left field last season. But again, you still expect it to be filled by a bunch of different guys going into this year. There's not likely to be that one main person who's going to stick in left field unless it's going to be Eddie Rosario. And Braves are hoping for a bounce back season from Eddie Rosario. great article by Justin Toscano of the AJC where he talks with Rosario and just the fact that he couldn't see the ball, and you can't hit the ball if you can't see it. That is pretty self-explanatory. And he just said last year, and he even told coaches, and coaches admitted it, that he was telling them you just can't see it. And again, pretty evident by his 3-44 start to the season before he ultimately had eye surgery. And he said that he felt like in the offseason, he was finally able to get back where his vision, was restored. So coming into the spring training, just 2 for 15 so far, but only 2 strikeouts. He's been making a lot of contact, which is great to see. So there is a potential for Eddie Rosario to come in and be primarily the everyday guy. I still think, they'll platoon him a little bit with lefties starters, but I think right now, if I were to project, I'd say Rosario is set to get the bulk of the starts in left field this upcoming season, as the Braves hope that he has a resurgent season now that he can see once again. And I think, if that doesn't work out, I think it just ultimately becomes a platoon situation. You look at Rosario, even when he could see and when he was an effective player, he was much better against righties, a 794 career OPS against right-handed hitters compared to 695 against lefties. Hilliard has some good splits as well as a left-handed hitter. He has a 725 OPS against righties compared to 689 against lefties in the big leagues. Much better numbers in the minors against righties. So he's a potential left-handed platoon option. Jordan Luplow, once he gets healthy, this guy crushes lefties. He has an 841 OPS at the big league level against lefties compared to 643 against righties. So that's why I think having him back and healthy, it's why I originally had him on the opening day roster before I knew about the injury news coming into camp, because he just gives you a right-handed bat either as a starter or off the bench that can crush lefties, and he has a strong arm as well. Eli White hasn't really been good against either right-handed or left-handed pitching at the big league level, but he's off to a great start in spring training, and he brings some other attributes with his speed and his defense. So again, I think there's a potential for the Braves to look for a platoon situation if Rosario can't become that everyday guy or somebody else. And I think at the very least, they're looking at solid defense out of the left field position this year. I mean, they were running, I just read the numbers to you. Ozuna and Rosario were out there more often than not last season for the Braves. So Alex Anthopoulos talked about the fact that guys they went out and acquired this offseason, they at least give them a floor of a good defensive player in left field. And I'm okay with that because of the rest of the lineup. We don't need left field to be some juggernaut offensively. If they can just play solid defense and hit in the 8-9 spot of the order with a 720 OPS, then, I can live with that. That is certainly fine. It's not great, but again, because of the rest of the roster, it can be serviceable for the Braves. I'm not asking for much here out of left field. Again, can you be league average? Can you be a 1-2 WAR player? Can you have a 720 to 740 OPS? That's all I'm really looking for out of left field, but I don't know that we get it. So that's why it's the biggest weakness for the Braves going into the season. And can they get that type of production from left field? Can they get any type of production from left field? That is certainly the biggest area of weakness heading into the 2023 season. All right, next I want to talk about some potential depth issues for the Braves as well as the DH position. In left field, doesn't lack a lot of depth. They have a lot of guys in there, but depth in the infield in particular is one of the biggest weaknesses for the Braves heading into this season. Who will get at bats at DH? Will that be a plus? Could it be a negative? We'll discuss that next. These days, every new potential hire feels like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Just add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile and spread the word. To spread the word, that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Yesterday on the podcast, we discussed MLB Pipeline's new top 30 prospect list and how they are still pretty high on Braden Shoemake and whether or not we're sleeping on him as a prospect. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and give it a listen. And then tomorrow, or rather later today, we're going to be talking about the biggest strengths for the Atlanta Braves heading into the 2023 season. Later in the week, I'm going to give you the 3 biggest keys to the Braves winning the World Series in 2023. So be on the lookout for that. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Braves on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Getting back into the biggest weaknesses for the Braves this upcoming season, I've discussed this one a lot here on the podcast, and that is just the lack of depth, and in particular, the lack of infield depth. Now, I will say as spring training has started, I'm feeling a little bit better about the depth on the infield. You know, I'm assuming Vaughn Grissom's going to be the guy. He's looked good at the plate. He's made all the plays defensively so far. So I certainly think he's going to be the starting shortstop, which puts Arcia on the bench. And Arcia is a really great backup option, a bench guy who can come in if needed every now and then. If a player goes down for a couple of weeks, you feel good with him, filling that gap. Do I want him starting 130, 140 games? No, but he is a solid backup option, somebody who can fill in for a while if needed. I feel a little bit better about Braden Shoemake. Not necessarily because of the bat, but just because of the strides that he's made defensively. And again, if something happens to Shoemake, if something happens to Ozzie Albies, or even if something happens to Austin Riley, I feel like you could throw Shoemake at either of those positions, and you at least know you're going to get above average defense. You're going to get a solid defender there. I think Luke Waddell is somebody who could be ready as a bench backup guy by mid-season. Perhaps even Cal Conley, but I think that's might be a little bit of a stretch. Adrianza is serviceable. He's having a good spring so far and is a switch hitter. Hechavarria, another veteran with solid defense. So I feel a little bit better about the infield depth. There's nobody in here that I would say, if Grissom, got injured and was out for a while, or Ozzie or Riley, if they were going to be missing a lot of time, I wouldn't feel comfortable with these guys filling that gap for months. But, just to fill in for a week, a quick IL stint, I'd feel comfortable with these guys as backup bench options in that role. Now, I wish there was a top infield prospect. Maybe Braden Shoemake is that guy. We talked about him yesterday, but I wish there was a top infield prospect who could come up and fill in a role if needed, like the Braves had with Vaughn Grissom last year and Michael Harris. They just don't have those guys this year with a ton of upside in the system who are knocking on the door. They don't have that this season. And, it's hard to keep starter level guys on the bench. It's hard to find those guys in free agency because those players want to go somewhere where they have a chance to start. So it's a lot easier to fill this gap during the season. We've seen Alex Anthopoulos do that before. We saw him revamp an entire outfield at one point during the season. But certainly going into the year, the lack of depth is something that concerns me and I think could be a little bit of a weakness, or has the potential to be a weakness for the Atlanta Braves. The next two weaknesses are, and these are potential weaknesses, are DH and defensive shortstop, but a listener pointed out on Twitter, I think it could be defense on the left side of the infield in general. But let's start with the DH position. Contreras and Acuna essentially carried the DH position last year. I mean, Contreras was the NL All-Star starter at the DH position. But, outside of those guys, the position was one of the worst in all of baseball. Ozuna got 72 starts at DH. Again, Contreras 31, Acuna 27. You had Alex Dickerson in there for 10 games, Rosario for 7, Mike Ford for a couple. So not great, but what can Ozuna do? That is the question right now that a lot of Braves fans are asking. And I think Braves coaches and executives as well is, what can Ozuna do for you? Can he do anything? And I've been very adamant in saying that if you give him 500 at bats in the DH position, I think he hits 240 with 25 to 30 home runs and 730, 740 OPS. Is that terrible? No. Is that worth 18 million a year? Probably not at the DH position, but I think he can do that for you. And I think he can give you average, maybe slightly below average production out of the DH spot. But is that enough? And how do they feel that DH role throughout the year? Do the catchers do a lot of the DHing? And how does Snitker play that out? You know, I'm sure he doesn't love the fact or the idea of having both of his catchers in the lineup at the same time. So we'll see how he handles that. You know, I like Murphy's defense, and I want to see it. I want to see him behind the plate 120 times a year, and I don't want him to get worn out having to catch, learn a new pitching staff, and have to worry about hitting at DH. I just think that's a lot of pressure on him, especially in his first year in Atlanta. And while I like Travis d'Arnaud as the DH, again, he's getting older. He has a lot of injury history as well. I don't want to overexert him. So I'm more so looking at some of these other guys to step up in the DH, whether it is Ozuna, whether you platoon it with guys like Rosario and Hilliard and Luplow and White. However they do it, they need more production out of the DH position. They need this to be a positive instead of a negative as it was last year. And I do think it will be more of a revolving door. I think Ozuna gets the majority of the at-bats at the DH position, especially early on, as the Braves give him a chance to prove himself once again. But if that's not working out, I think it just becomes somewhat of a revolving door. And then the other potential weakness, I want to be clear, this is a potential weakness. I'm not throwing any shade towards Vaughn Grissom. I need to see it, and I've been very clear about that. I need to see it. But what's it going to look like? How is he going to be defensively? Can he just make the routine plays, which he's done so far in spring training? Not a lot of chances. I think he's had less than 10 ground balls so far this spring, but can he just make the routine plays? And I think if he does that, they'll be just fine. Do these shift rules change things? I think that's something we haven't really considered a lot. Does it make the shortstop position defensively that much more important? And do we see perhaps a lack of range limit the ability of what the Braves can get out of their defender at shortstop and on the left side in general? Because Austin Riley, while he's great at getting everything that comes his way, he doesn't have a lot of side-to-side range either. So really the left side of the infield defensively, I think, could be a potential weakness for the Braves. I think they're going to make all the plays, but are they going to make those extra plays? Are they going to make those spectacular plays that kind of put you over the top? That's something I don't know. Now, I think they can just make the routine plays, and I think Braves pitchers are going to strike out enough batters that perhaps it may not matter. But if they can just make the routine plays, I think the Braves will be fine. But I think there's the potential for the left side of the infield to be negative defensively overall. I think both Riley and Grissom could rank negative defensively as far as how FanGraphs does their defensive rankings. So I think that could be a potential weakness. I want to be clear, that's a potential weakness for the Braves. All right, next I want to get into your Twitter comments on what you think could be the potential weaknesses for the Braves this year. And then the Braves were off on Monday as players head off to the World Baseball Classic. Ronald Acuna Jr. is off with Team Venezuela. He seems ready to reintroduce himself to the baseball world in the upcoming Classic. We'll talk about that and some other news and comments here next. All right, jumping into your Twitter comments, I had asked what your biggest weaknesses for the Braves are going into the 2023. Jason Davis says, organization positional depth, especially infield positional depth. We talked about that. DH, if either catcher is not DHing on a given day. Left field offensive production if Rosario does not return to form. We talked about all three of those. And lack of a defined plastic sword swinging celebration guy. And I think that could be one of the biggest weaknesses for the Braves team heading into 2023 for sure. Anthony, I'm not going to try to say that last name. Prospect pool for trade collateral and strength of division. And I thought this was a great take here from Anthony, because if things don't work out in left field, if the Braves need to go out and make a trade to fix some things, to fix some depth on the team, they don't have a lot of trade capital to pull from. They have some pitchers at the upper levels that I think could get a solid player, perhaps a depth starter type, bench type, back of the rotation type arm, but nothing significant. So I think that could be a weakness for this team as well, as just their lack of trade collateral, as Anthony said. Danny Ade says left field and maybe fifth starter. I saw some others say fifth starter as well. I don't consider that a weakness at all. I think 29 other teams would love for their fifth starter position to be between guys like Ian Anderson, Michael Soroka, Bryce Elder, Dylan Dodd, and Jared Schuster, with guys like Colby Allard and Darius Vines waiting in the wings. I think 29 other teams would love to have that problem. So I don't consider rotational depth or fifth starter a weakness for the Braves. Dan says defense on the left side and staying healthy. Staying healthy, obviously, one of the biggest concerns for any team heading into the season, but certainly for the Braves with guys like Acuna, like Ozzie Albies. And again, if anybody on that infield gets hurt for a significant time, then that lack of depth could really show up there. And then Jacob Suttle says day games, and not one that I consider, but hopefully they are putting those day games behind them, those day game issues behind them going into 2023, because it certainly was a problem for them last year. Heading into some news for Tuesday, Acuna and Rosario both left to join their World Baseball Classic teams. Puerto Rico will actually be coming to face the Braves on Thursday. So Eddie Rosario will be facing his own team. And then big games on Saturday, including USA. Also, Ronald Acuna and Venezuela will be going up against the Dominican Republic at 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturday night. That will be can't miss baseball right there. Trust me on that. Bally announces its broadcast schedule for the upcoming season, scheduled to broadcast 149 Braves games this year. That is obviously subject to change depending on how their bankruptcy situation works out this season. So stay tuned there. But for now, they are scheduled to carry 149 Braves games this year. And then the Braves announced that they put a deadline on season ticket sales for the upcoming season in order to assure there will be enough single game tickets left for fans who want to attend a limited number of games. And they already expect to surpass 3.1 million fans that they drew last year. So kudos to all you Braves fans out there. That is really fun, and it's a great time to be a Braves fan. And, this is just an amazing note that we're seeing going into the year, that they're already expecting to draw over 3 million fans. So really love where Braves country is right now. I love you, the listener, being a part of that and listening to this podcast each and every day. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Sorry, this one's a little bit delayed today with the technical issues I was having on Monday evening. Sorry I wasn't able to do a live show, but I'll do a live show Tuesday night talking about the biggest strengths for the Braves. Again, thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. You can follow me at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.